It's WG, bring your SMV. Tomorrow we get Ancestor number 7, the most exclusive faction in the game. And I decided, why don't we make a guide about every single Ancestor there is? And which Ancestor better to start with than the main girl herself, Transcendant Hati. Transcendant Hati is going to be our target for today. So we'll be talking about everything from gearing to skill rotations to skill priorities to artifacts, anything else you might need to know. So Transcendant Hati, let's briefly go through her melee, AoE damage, continuous damage. You have physical, full moon, warrior, medium armor, ancestral faction. Let's get into the rest, or let's already get into the skills. So simply explained, let's have a look at the, let's start with Sorrow's Taint. So once Hati's continuous damage effect on an enemy ends, which is either when it runs out of time or technically when that unit dies, as you can see right here, if the target dies, all of the continuous damage effects have a 50% chance to transfer to the closest enemy, becoming a pestilence that lasts for 8 seconds. Pestilence is the strongest DOT in the game by a mile, and that is because, have a look at this. Takes physical damage equal to 50% of the caster's attack every 2 seconds and gains attack speed down by 20%. The attack speed down stays at 20%, it doesn't go up to 200%, alright? But this is the important part, stacking up to 10 times. 500% of the caster's attack every 2 seconds. You're looking at 250% damage per second just through that debuff alone, and that's not even it, because once you go above 7 stacks, all of a sudden you're also dealing AoE damage to enemies that are close to those units. So if you can bunch up enemies, if you can stack up these pestilence stacks, you're going to have a really good time. Next up, we have her basic attack. Her basic attack, the only thing that's really noteworthy about it is the fact that it scales really well. Like, it is one of the stronger basic attacks, but it's not super noteworthy. Next up, we have pestilence scales, where every 2 basic attacks you deal a certain amount of damage to the target, and you also inflict a stack of pestilence, which is the one we really like. As well as also in a circle, so it's AoE application. And then here, when you are in a Blood Moon, the next 2 basic attacks are guaranteed to be her special, which means you have, for example, 1 stack applied, and then if you're in a Blood Moon, you're going to apply 2 AoE pestilence stacks through this one right here. And then lastly, to finish it all off, you have the ultimate, where you deal a total of X amount of % physical damage to enemies in a rectangle, distributed evenly, but also you immediately trigger all continuous damage effect carried by enemies twice. Triggers, you don't detonate them, you don't delete them, they still stay, but what you do right here is, let me give you an example. We have 10 stacks of pestilence on a target, and then we trigger the ultimate, then we're gonna trigger all 10 stacks of pestilence once, doing 500% damage, and then again doing another 500% damage, giving you an extra 1000% damage, and that is to everybody that you can hit with her ultimate. Her range is a bit more tiny, but if you can make it work, it is really, really strong. So overall skill priority, basic attack has the lowest priority. Then I would actually argue it's going to be the special, because you can reliably trigger that special quite often during Blood Moons or just after every 2 basic attacks. And then it would be ultimate. So it would go special, ultimate, basic attack would be the ult or skill up priority. Overall, Hati is one of those units you can reliably invest in. She was a top tier or the top tier DPS for pretty much every single piece of content we have gotten up until now where damage was relevant. And overall, artifact wise, there's not much to debate. To a degree, you could say if you have if you are really just looking for the debuffs and you have an Eye of Truth of level 5, you could run it, but overall you're always going to get the most damage by having Poseidon's Skull on her, giving you increased damage to enemies under debuff or control effects, which she naturally applies herself. And then one step further, once you get to the level 5, you're also going to be dealing extra damage to the target on a 10-second cooldown, which Hati basically will always trigger, and there shouldn't be really any downtime in between those. Overall, artifact upgrade wise though, Poseidon's Skull should be, I would say, number 3. Currently, in my opinion, it's going to be number 3 behind Philosophers. So it goes Eye of Truth, Philosophers, then Poseidon's, then probably the Chronometer. the summon artifact. So that's all you kind of need to know about her build. Now, how, where, why, and what do you actually use together with her? Alright, so here we are for the team building section, which we'll then follow up with some combat examples. But overall, we have our Hati right here, and let me show you the best units to use alongside of a Hati. Number one, we're going to be going over Darcias. Darcias is only here for her special. Every 2 basic attacks, Darcias is going to inflict AoE bleed, and then if a target is inflicted with a bleed, she's gonna double the stack, so it goes from 1 stack to 2 to 4 to 8, then technically 10. So Darcias is really good at stacking these bleeds, and if you give her an Eye of Truth, she's gonna be able to stack these even faster. So Eye of Truth at level 5 can do some work on Darcias, as well as also you're not gonna be using her ultimate. So yeah, you also see how her basic attack further inflicts bleed. So yeah, basic attack and special, give her the basic attack artifact, more basic attacks, more specials, more bleeds, more continuous damage, going up to a total of 300% that you can then use and detonate with the Transcendent Hati. Next up we have Daikalo. Daikalo is kind of like the perfect support to run alongside a Hati, because not only do you have the shutdown ability and the morph ability right here, as well as potentially increasing the damage taken up. No, most importantly, you have another continuous damage affliction, which adds 30% attack from the caster once every 2 seconds as damage, and you inflict that one on targets that are hit by the ultimate. So it is pretty reliable, pretty easy to trigger, you could even say. And then lastly, we also have Agaris. Now, what you can notice is Agaris and Daikalo do actually apply the same debuffs, but you don't necessarily have to worry about it too much, because you're not going to be double casting Agaris ultimate, bringing you over like the stack cap. But yeah, what Agaris does is he's just a source of like burst debuff infliction, where when you use this ultimate, you get instantly 5 stacks of the continuous damage affliction, which yields you over 150% of this. I would like to call it a burn, but no, it is a continuous damage affliction. Yeah. So those are like the most popular ones just in the DOT synergy, but then we also have, I guess you could say, the support part, where we have a Acapella who can give her physical damage up as well as crit rate up, but Acapella is not necessarily the best support, because for example Daikalo exists and you would probably rather get those debuffs out. But no, on top of that you also have the ability to just run a Fleeting Bella. You can just run a Fleeting Bella together with your Transcendent Hati, and then possess your Transcendent Hati with a Fleeting Bella for you to actually see some results, because not only do you get more basic attacks right here, more basic attacks meaning you're going to trigger the special more often. Let me see, it doesn't show right here, but obviously here you have attack speed up major. You also furthermore give Hati even more attack, meaning her ult, so everything else does more damage. I don't necessarily think it applies to the debuff. The debuff should go from your Hati's base attack, but to finish it all off, you also further increase the damage rate by 45%. So Fleeting Bella plus Hati is already also very strong on its own. Now, in general, there's 2 scenarios where you use a Hati. Scenario number 1 is it's a pure full damage boss fight comp, and then you could run something like this, where you buff with Acapella, buff with Fleeting Bella, then apply a debuff with your Agaris, and then detonate it with your Hati. Or, for example, run a Fleeting Bella for damage, then on top of that add in a Daikalo. So you kind of rotate from Daikalo into from Fleeting Bella into Hati with Daikalo, and then finish off with an Agaris, and then detonate it all with the Transcendent Hati. So this is if you don't have any survivability issues, but in story you're most likely going to run into a scenario where you kind of prefer something like running a tank, so that you actually have some means of survivability. And there it is actually advised to, if you want to make like easier progress in story and use Hati there, is to use someone like a Stereite Iona, and just have Stereite Iona be the one to actually buff a Transcendent Hati with the shield buff. Because what you're going to see right here is, even though the tank does take most of the fire, you still also take away from the pressure of your tank by having a second fighter in the front line. And also this is something that's very important for you to manage. Look at this, for example, right here. Like this, we're actually going to have 3 different units attacking Hati, but if we move the tank just one spot over, so make sure you look at these red lines and try to take as much pressure off of your Hati and put it onto your tank. But then again, you might need that extra survivability with, for example, an extra shield on a Hati, which is actually quite common. So yeah, let's actually run with the squad like this. We're around 20k BP down, but we might still come out ahead. But to be fair, you don't necessarily run Darcius if you play story. You can run an Agaris quite easily. You can run a Transcendent Hati quite easily. You can make sure you get your buffs out, but you're not really gonna see any presence of Darcius because I don't know, you don't necessarily want to run 3 frontline units kind of for story. That's really the deal, but you could try it out. You could try a tank plus Hati plus Darcius. It just feels like you're gonna be missing out on a little bit of damage, you could say. So alright, let's just go in here. Let's kind of give it a shot. And then right here we'll already be going into our Transcendent Hati, so that Hati can actually apply even more debuffs. We can also use a cappella to give ourselves some of those stacks. And then right here we actually just want to inflict the infliction, use our Hati to hit these 2 guys, and then this is pretty much overkill. Those guys are already dead. And then once more we can again possess Hati. And then here even. You see how these debuffs are now also stacking. Like depending on RNG, you're gonna keep more or less of the debuffs on the field permanently. And this is kind of what I mentioned why you potentially want to bring a second like shielder / supporter, because now Hati died. So to address, you could say, the issue of Hati dying, that is where then, for example, as we've talked about, Steroid Aeona would come in to provide some extra shields to Hati. And then we have our Friedrich right here, as well as Agaris and Dalcalo. Dalcalo for some shutdown, Agaris for the extra debuff ability. But to be fair, in a setup like this, you might even actually be better off running something closer to Fleeting Bella plus Steroid Aeona, because it just gives you more survivability and overall more damage potential, because especially for story you don't necessarily need the affliction from Agaris. So we have our Fleeting Bella, we have our Dalcalo, and then we have our Hati. So here we now have a tank that is pretty much not going to be summoning any summons, so there also won't be as much retargeting. We're going to be making sure that we possess Hati so that we get more of these debuffs out. We can also use our Dalcalo to stop the enemies from casting whatever they are doing right there. And then right here, you see how these HP bars actually glow. When whoever is glowing is actually getting hit by your ultimate, you could say. So that might actually be quite helpful. And here, as you've kind of seen it, we should have actually used the ability of Friedrich to actually give him a bigger shield. But we kind of missed that timing though. But here we'll most likely still be fine if we just bruise our way through. You can see these, like 10 massive stacks of the Pestilence right here. If you then detonate that, it's just a whole bunch of damage. And we obviously also have that extra healing. Here once more we can, I guess, drag our units together, give him a shield, make sure we get a bit more survivable. And then also once more, I mean, Hati, she's really only specifically good at doing like incredible damage when there's not a lot of things happening on the field that threaten her. Or I guess you could say to like shut out elite and golden monsters, if that's something you need to do. And then for example here we could finish off the fight. Alright, and here's going to be like a bit of an example of what a single target fight looks like. The biggest problem here though, this guy has a bit too many mechanics to like comfortably use a Hati team. But I guess I just kind of want to show you rotation. So for example, we're using a cappella to increase our blood soul recovery, as well as apply some buffs. Then right here we want to use Fleeting Bella to start possessing our Hati, so we can get more of these stacks in. And we can use Agaris right here to also inflict the burn, and then use a Hati to pretty much explode the burn, explode the bleeds, explode everything else right here. And you can see like this massive like increase in damage dealt. Obviously at this point we're kind of gonna get cooked by the boss's mechanics, but that's just because we didn't necessarily bring anything to prepare. But you can see this was pretty much just one rotation and we've already dealt over 1 million damage to the boss itself. So that's kind of what you're looking at in particular when it comes to like a single target Hati rotation. Alright, so now how about Hati in actual PvP? I gotta be honest with you here, the only time you're gonna see her is probably in a Crucible 2nd or 3rd defense. Otherwise, Van Helsing and Fleeting Bella, they're just, I guess you could say, too dominant right now. So yeah, overall you're not really gonna see those units make too much of a splash, or Hati or like the DOT comp. Especially also because Hati is very much about like precisely timing where and who you want to hit, and during PvP you're basically most likely gonna end up with a Hati hitting a Bella puppet, for example, or like just hitting the tank instead of hitting multiple. You cannot quite... The same is true for Agaris. Agaris is gonna like hit a puppet, Dicarlo is gonna, I don't know, hit the tank. So yeah, at least in PvP, because of the loss of control, you don't necessarily see her besides like a Crucible 3rd or 2nd defense. So like clothing thoughts slash last things I want to give you as like tips. Hati is at her strongest if you're fighting a boss. If you're fighting a boss, Hati is by far at her strongest, and she's been dominating or at least having one of the most dominant teams in both prophecies we've now had. She was relevant in Night of the Hunt, and she also shone during Clan Hunt. So I don't think it's gonna stop anytime soon with her being relevant when it comes to like the DPS side of things. It's just, you have to be a bit more mindful when you want to use her in story or like non-boss content. Yeah, I guess that kinda finishes up Hati, and by far one of the, if not the strongest ancestor. Still remains to be seen how good Timeless Aeona is though. Peace.